The early signing period approaches. We are in the thick of the transfer portal season. Where should Oklahoma go from here? We'll talk about it on today's episode of Locked On Sooners.
You are Locked On Sooners, your daily podcast on the Oklahoma Sooners, part of the Locked On Podcast Network, your team every day.
What's up, Sooner Nation? Welcome to Locked On Sooners, and thank you for making Locked On Sooners your first listen. We are your team every day. Today's episode is brought to you by Prize Picks. Go to prizepicks.com/lockedon and use code LOCKEDON for a deposit match up to $100. Daily fantasy sports made easy over at Prize Picks. Thank you for joining us. I'm John Williams. You can follow me on Twitter at John9Williams. My buddy here is back. Josh Helmer back in the saddle this week after having a week off last week. Follow him on Twitter at JoshOnRef here Monday through Friday from 9 to noon on the KREF Sports app. But congrats once again on engagement time. Congrats to you and Amanda on that, Josh.
John, thank you, my friend. I understand it was not just an eventful week for me personally, but for Oklahoma, it was quite an eventful week.
Yeah, dude, it seems like everything happened. So next time we want to see some things go down in Oklahoma and the news sphere, just plan a vacation, Josh, and I'm sure we'll get a lot of good stories to talk about. With everything that's gone down, so we got the Spencer Brown commitment from Michigan State through the transfer portal. We got Deion Burks out of Purdue through the transfer portal to Oklahoma. Let's do a little bit of a reset here on what Oklahoma still needs to pursue as they get ready for the Alamo Bowl and as they look to build their team for 2024. Josh, what are a couple needs that you think that the Sooners still need to grab in the transfer portal this offseason?
Well, I think it was the case regardless, but obviously with the Caden Green surprise, the importance and the gusto with which Oklahoma needs to attack the transfer portal at offensive guard, at center, at offensive tackle, just the offensive line, really, because of Green, guard and tackle, right? And now you're in the mix for one more name at each of those positions, depending upon where you thought Caden Green was going to theoretically slot in for Oklahoma next season. So offensive line was already an area that Oklahoma needed to beef up, but obviously with the Caden Green decision, now that only picks up importance, John.
It absolutely does. And I know a lot of people are looking at this offensive line class that's coming in, projected to come in 2024. We still got to get them signed, but projected to come in 2024 and thinking, okay, they can potentially be the answer at guard. And that may very well be the case. That could happen in 2023. But again, let's look back on in 2024. Let's look back on the 2023 season. Caden Green wasn't the initial answer at guard for the Sooners. It only took 7 games into the season for him to really solidify a role. Let's not bank on the true freshman. Let's have some realistic expectations. If they come in and exceed those expectations, great, phenomenal. But the Oklahoma Sooners need to find some answers in the way of a veteran guard to pair potentially with either a Jake Taylor or, you look at a guy maybe like, is Caleb Schaefer back? Like, I got to look at his, he's a redshirt senior, so I guess technically he could be back. So potentially that's one of your answers. Troy Everett, does he move over to guard if Josh Bates ends up taking over the center position? There are a lot of questions, but I think you do yourself a benefit by adding a veteran guard there. Any other positions that you feel like Oklahoma really needs to attack?
Well, and I would say this too on the offensive line front is the sell to a potential offensive guard or tackle honestly got a little bit easier with the Caden Green decision, right? I mean, now you have a pretty easy sales pitch of, look, you got a chance to come in and play straight away at a number of positions up front. Well, I mean, one of the names that I guess is on the radar now is a tight end offer that is out there for Oklahoma. And I think that was probably another kind of obvious position that we could point to for Oklahoma, given the problems that OU had this past season and just the situation coming back at tight end where you don't have a lot proven at tight end for Oklahoma. So that would obviously be an area, John, that you think about this offense for Oklahoma. Obviously, they've addressed wide receiver, even though, with or without Deion Burks, I think you were probably going to be in a pretty good place. But adding Deion Burks, you feel good there. Sam Franklin, again, I think you were going to be in a pretty good place at running back, but you just add to the depth bringing him in. So you think about just the overall picture offensively, obviously not looking very seriously at a starting caliber quarterback. You're set there with Jackson Arnold. So just the final puzzle pieces offensively, you would think, okay, if we're not talking offensive line, that yes, a proven, productive tight end. We're excited about Devon Mitchell coming in, 5-star blue chip type kid, 4-star, depending on, I guess, where you look, right? But that pedigree, you're excited about it. But if you can bring me somebody in that has played college football and has been productive, okay, that's a welcome sight.
Yeah, and with the Davin Mitchell thing, like, let's not forget that he reclassified. He should really be going into his senior year in 2024, but decided to come a little bit early. Now, that's great. It's going to get him a head start on his development, but let's just, again, have like temper expectations. I have people telling me on Twitter he might be the greatest Oklahoma tight end of all time, and that very well may be the case. And I'm ecstatic if that happens in year one. I just don't want to put out there these expectations that Davin Mitchell is going to come in and be the answer, at the position as a true freshman and a young true freshman for the Sooners. Could it happen? 100%. The dude's got all the skill and all the talent in the world. It's just making that jump from high school to college. It can take time. You hear guys like, Caden Helms and Gentry Williams last week talked about the difference between high school and college, and that's true for everybody. But at tight end, they really need to find some help. And that could be in just getting Caden Helms healthy and getting him back on the field and developed and ready to play next year, and being your answer at tight end as you continue to bring along the position. But somebody that it looks like Oklahoma might end up landing is Bauer Sharp. He played for Southeast Louisiana, the Lions, FCS school. It's not big time production, but he's got some very interesting production. In 2023, he touched the ball 54 times for just over 500 yards. Just over 400 yards, but he had 8 total touchdowns, including 5 rushing touchdowns. So this might be kind of your H-back tight end hybrid type of player that Oklahoma is looking at getting. Josh McQuistion of Sooner Scoop and OU Insider logged a prediction favoring the Sooners for Sharp. So I think that potentially is like maybe your veteran option as you bring your young guys, Caden Helms, Cade McIntyre, Devon Mitchell. You bring these guys along, at least you've got somebody that's got some collegiate experience under his belt to be a safety net for you at the position.
Well, and there's an urgency to get, again, somebody that's played collegiate football in for Oklahoma. But I'm guessing that Joe John Finley and OU, they've watched the tape. They feel like, at the FCS level can step up and projects to be somebody that can impact things for Oklahoma, obviously, as that would be the jump into the FBS level. So, look, they need help there. It would be an addition that would be welcome for Oklahoma. You flip to the other side of the football, I think even with the recent positive return announcements, you're not going to turn away a defensive tackle, right? The right defensive tackle comes knocking. That would be an obvious other position you would say, yes, please.
Yeah, absolutely. I think everybody's got their eyes down on what's going on down in College Station with all the transfer portal departures for the Aggies. And it could make a lot of sense to add an interior defensive lineman from those portal departures. We'll see if that comes down to it. But I mean, yeah, getting Jacob Lacey, getting Dejon Terry back to join Ashton Sanders and Grayson Halton, Marcus Strong, and then the incoming class that includes David Stone and Jaden Jackson. I mean, it looks promising. But if you could add another piece with some production, I think it'd make you feel a lot more comfortable going into 2024. We're going to get into early signing period a little bit because, hey, the early signing period is upon us. What's going to happen for the Oklahoma Sooners? We'll talk about it next. Passion, drive, and patience. What brings home the winning trophy is also what keeps your ride or die alive. eBay Motors has everything you need to maintain your vehicle and level it up to peak performance, from superchargers, roof racks, exhaust kits, LED headlights, and more. Whether you're into speed, power, or style, eBay Motors has got you covered. With over 122 million parts for your number one ride or die, you'll always find exactly what you're looking for. And with eBay Guaranteed Fit, your part is guaranteed to fit your ride every time or your money back. Because with eBay Motors, you're burning rubber and not cash. With all the parts you need at the prices you want, it's easy to turn your car into the MVP and bring home that win. Keep your ride or die alive at ebaymotors.com. Eligible items only. Exclusions apply. eBay Guaranteed Fit only available to U.S. customers. And all our recruiting segments are brought to you by LinkedIn. These days, every new potential hire can feel like a high-stakes wager for your small business. That's why LinkedIn Jobs helps find the right people for your team faster and for free. Post your job for free at linkedin.com/lockedoncollege. Terms and conditions apply. So, Josh, the early signing period is coming up, and there's just not a whole lot of drama surrounding Oklahoma's recruiting class. If anything, they're adding more pieces to it. You get the Eddie Pierre-Louis commitment late last week on Friday, which was huge for the Sooners. We discussed that, or I discussed that in a show Friday night in the Saturday morning. But Josh, just let's get your thoughts on that. And maybe you can go through some of your thoughts on all of the things that you missed. But let's just touch on Eddie Pierre-Louis real quick before we get into the signing period stuff. How big was it for the Sooners to land that commitment?
Oh, I think it's an important add late in the cycle up front for Oklahoma offensively. It's been one of the, no pun intended, big targets on the board for Oklahoma to close this class for, I don't know how many months, dating back to the midsummer. You and I were talking about Eddie Pierre-Louis, and if that was going to be a possibility that you could pry him away from UCF. And obviously there were some other suitors there as well. And at times it felt like, okay, Oklahoma was leading that pack, and then it felt like it had shifted away. And it was kind of that name and Grant Bricks, right? If you could add both of those names to this class, then all of a sudden every narrative that was negative early offensive line wise for Oklahoma would really flip. And obviously you've gotten one of the two. So it, no doubt it's important. And it seems to be somebody that people think really, really highly of. I think obviously Akinkunmi going back a little bit further to pair with Autry and everybody else up front in this class. It's wound up being not on paper this change the history books type of offensive line class for Oklahoma, but I think it is an offensive line class that OU can feel good about, in large part because of the final piece maybe to that in Eddie Pierre-Louis.
Yeah, I think the combination of the five guys that they're bringing in, Akinkunmi, Josh Isosa, Eugene Brooks, Isaiah Autry, and Eddie Pierre-Louis. Dude, that's a really, I think, strong and athletic group. It's not a star-studded class. The recruiting rankings don't love all those guys except for Eddie Pierre-Louis. But there's a lot of promise and a lot of tools for Bill Bedenbaugh to work with there. And so I'm encouraged and I'm excited. Even going back to a guy like Isaiah Autry, whose recruitment has been real drama-free. Like, he's been committed since the spring, and you didn't really hear a peep otherwise. Like, that there was any concern about, Ole Miss jumping back into the fray or anything like that. Like, yeah, he took a visit, but it was just to kind of go hang out. No, the dude's been 100% committed, and that's just really kind of what it's come down to for this whole class. You had the Dozie Ezukanma decommitment, but other than that, this 2024 cycle has been, for the most part, drama-free once everybody got committed. I know there was a lot of gnashing of teeth a little bit about, whether David Stone was going to commit or not. But for the most part, it's just been no, everybody's just kind of locked in, and going into the early signing period, I don't expect any surprises really to the negative side for Oklahoma. I would never discount a positive surprise with this coaching staff and the way that they're able to recruit. But the way things sound right now, man, it's looking all roses for Oklahoma as they go into the early signing period.
Yeah, which is good. It doesn't feel, knock on wood here, drama laden for OU as we approach, early signing period coming up right around the corner. So sounds like everybody right now is going to be a Sooner, and you haven't heard those rumblings of waffling with a name. And, occasionally that does exist to some degree, to where there's a name on the board that, even though you don't want to expect it for anybody, it's okay. Well, you start kind of hearing those rumblings that, okay, maybe there's some late teeter-tottering in one direction. We haven't heard that for anybody with Oklahoma in this class, which is good. Drama-free at this point, as it pertains to those that are committed to Oklahoma, is great. Now, if there's some drama elsewhere that Oklahoma could inflict, well, that would be great too. But I don't know that necessarily that's going to happen. It doesn't seem like. Maybe this is where we're going to finish for the most part for Oklahoma. I don't know that there's any real late targets that they're going to get in the boat here, John. So you think about what they've got. Obviously, defensive line is very, very impressive. Starting with the name that you mentioned in Stone, but it's more to it than that. It's Nigel Smith, and it's Jaden Jackson, right? It's Gilmore. It's Danny Okoye. I mean, it's a really, really good defensive line class. And given that this is year one now going into the SEC, that should be very, very exciting to Sooner fans.
Yeah, it's a good class at a lot of different spots. I mean, you look at quarterback with Michael Hawkins and Brennan Serberg. I think Hawkins proved this season that he was very, very much underrated according to the recruiting rankings. And then Brennan Serberg, I mean, that's a really good addition as well. The wide receiver core is just stacked. Like Emmett Jones continues to put together a fantastic wide receiver. I mean, Devon Mitchell, he's your only tight end, but man, what a great tight end you're bringing in this class. We talked offensive line. Defensive line, I think the defensive line is kind of the one position group that could put that. Man, you probably think it's the best position group, and if it's not, you think maybe wide receiver is the best one. Those two are kind of the cherry on top of the sundaes that you're building. But then the defensive backfield is looking really, really good as well. With Reggie Powers and Jeremiah Newcomb and Jaden Hardy and Eli Bowen. I mean, it's a really, really good class, kind of across the board. And it's diverse. They're not. I don't think that they're short or really. They're not bringing in talent at a certain position group. I mean, you look even at the preferred walk-ons, like at kicker and, at different athletes and things like that. I think they're looking really, really solid. The one name that's still out there that Oklahoma might have a chance at, that's Dominic McKinley. He's kind of pushing his signing day back to February, to like the official signing day. And Todd Bates and Brent Venables were just down there visiting with him. So if they can pull that one off, it takes a great class that you already have put together and makes it even greater. But it's just going to show, like, okay, at this point, 3 years into Brent Venables' tenure, top 10 classes are the norm. And for the most part, drama-free classes heading into the early signing period are going to be the norm as well. So it's exciting. There was one other thing I wanted to touch on with all that, but then it just slipped my mind, Josh. But can't think of what it was now. Anyway.
I will tell you this. If they wind up with Dominic McKinley, it'll turn into, in a lot of ways, kind of what we were hoping with a Williams-Nwaneri. When you think about just the sheer excess of riches up front. I think they're not far away from that right now. I love what they have in this class. But if you add that would be that one final piece that really makes it a historic class up front for Oklahoma defensively, which, look, I mean, you know this, I know this, everybody knows this, right? Anybody watching or listening knows that where OU's going, you're going to have those kind of dudes up front. So Taylor Tatum at running back was obviously a massive win in the moment that Oklahoma got that. So what you're bringing in at tailback in this class, I mean, you listed a bunch of the names, but even with Dozie Azukama, flipping, and obviously who was the wide receiver I'm thinking of that everybody really liked that wound up at Clemson?
Bryant Wesco,
talked about him early in the class, but with Kearney and up and down the wide receivers that they've got. Carry-on, I think somebody that you can be excited about. Zion Raggins. I mean, it's a really good skill group when you think about those guys. KJ Daniels, I don't want to slight anybody. Xavier Robinson in the backfield brings a different dimension from Taylor Tatum. So no, it's a good class. I think anytime, obviously great would probably be, okay, can you get into that top 5 and beyond into the top 3 or whatever? But at least according to what the Recruitniks and the ratings say out there, right? But this is a very, very good class for me, John. I think anytime, like Oklahoma, to me, don't be outside the top 10. You got to be inside the top 10. And then if you can sprinkle and stack some top 5s, top 3s in there, okay, well, now you're reaching that great class status. But nobody should turn their nose up at Oklahoma consistently turning out top 10 classes. If they can do that, they'll compete in the SEC, especially if it's defined by, again, what this class is defined by, which is big-time talent up front defensively.
Yeah, and I think one thing that's going to help them compete in the SEC is the guy that we're going to get to watch play quarterback for the Sooners here in the Alamo Bowl in under 2 weeks' time, and that's Jackson Arnold. Former cornerback Jaden Davis had some thoughts on Jackson Arnold, Lincoln Riley, Alex Grinch. We'll touch on some of those coming up next. Locked On Sooners is your number one source for your team everyday coverage here on the Locked On Podcast Network. Make sure you subscribe to the show wherever you get your podcasts. We're free and available on every platform and on YouTube. Hit that subscribe and notification bell to let you know when new episodes drop. So, Josh, Jaden Davis made what I thought was a great appearance. The dude is a really good interview, it looks like, but had a lot of really interesting things to say about his time in Norman and really the way that it ended. But let's kind of start on a positive note. About Jackson Arnold, I thought was a really interesting nugget. He had a lot of good things to say, comparing him to Caleb Williams, talked about potentially being another Heisman contender, but ultimately ended with this. I don't even think that Jackson Arnold, knows how good he's going to be yet. And the other part of that interview, or that clip that was shared, and this is all coming from the folks over at Momentum Podcast who did the Jaden Davis interview. He said that he's just a little bit different of a guy. He's not as vocal maybe as Spencer Rattler or Caleb Williams or maybe even Dylan Gabriel as far as the guy that's going to let you know when he completes a pass on you, but he's just a guy that's going to go about his business. So kind of reminds me a little bit maybe of a Jalen Hurts kind of personality, just somebody who's about the business and about the work. But man, I'm excited. Like if a guy who didn't really get a chance to play with him thinks that highly of Jackson Arnold, potentially the sky is the limit for this kid.
Yeah, well, and that's a guy that's patrolling, right? The defensive backfield. So that's exciting. I mean, that's somebody that understands I'm trying to contain this guy, and he's tough to contain. And, oh, by the way, he's got an arm that can challenge me and my cohorts back here in the defensive backfield at every level of this defensive backfield. So it's exciting. I'm not shocked to hear somebody that was around Jackson Arnold say something like that, simply because from a tools perspective, John, this is what we've been led to believe, and we've seen with our own eyes, right? From the spring game to bits and pieces of the limited action that Arnold has gotten while, a member of the University of Oklahoma football team. We've seen that he's got an arm for days. We knew that coming in. He was the Elite 11 winning quarterback. I mean, it's there. We knew that. He had the track record coming in, but it just amplifies it when you have somebody that, again, has to sit there and cover those wide receivers that Jackson Arnold's going to be throwing to. And, oh, by the way, was somebody that had to make sure he contained and got Jackson Arnold to the ground, or attempted to, with a blue jersey on for Jackson Arnold, that understands, this is going to be somebody that's tough to chase and track down for defenders. And he's right. I mean, he's so young that probably to some degree, every quarterback that comes in 4-star, 5-star, okay, they probably have expectations about themselves, especially with, again, the pedigree that Jackson Arnold brings, John. But to some degree, as much as they know, hey, I'm pretty doggone good and I can do things that other guys can't do, yes, there probably is also that other layer, which is, but there's an indecisiveness or just just being green at the gills to where you haven't, been in every single situation. And until you are, then you're going to realize, oh, okay, I really can do things that other guys can't do. And I really am this special.
Yeah, and I want to correct myself. So Jaden Davis did spend about 5 months at least with Jackson Arnold before he transferred to Miami. Davis didn't transfer until after the 2023 spring game. So correcting myself here. So you all probably knew that because a lot of times you listeners are just as informed or sometimes more informed, or at least remember things a little bit better than I can in my old age. But the other thing that Jaden Davis spoke on was the departure of Lincoln Riley, and had two really interesting comments there. One, that I guess people around the program were wondering if Lincoln Riley wasn't completely locked in against Oklahoma State or wasn't completely focused, said that the coaching staff didn't seem to have the same focus and they weren't giving out the same energy as they might for a normal game week as they had in the past. And then the other part of that was that, it just was a whole different vibe. Before, during the game, people were wondering what kind of plays he was calling. And then after the game, Lincoln Riley, speaking in the locker room saying, "Hey, I'm with you guys. This is where I'm supposed to be. I'm not going to LSU." We all remember the famous quote after Kerry Murdoch asks, are you going to LSU? And he says, "I'm not going to LSU." All the while, we know it went down. But then the final aspect of that being, mine is just running blanks tonight, Josh. This is crazy. But anyway, go on that. What did you think of all that? What about what Jaden had to say?
Maybe you're thinking about the text the next morning at 8 a.m. and then, hey, it's a meeting at 2. And we've kind of all heard that portion of the story, but not all the time from players. Well, I thought it was fascinating, first of all, that a former player would either just openly discuss or confirm that the players themselves had similar questions about Lincoln Riley's exit as you and I, the fan base, many did, which was, did Lincoln Riley, I mean, look, let's just get it out in the open. The not so well-kept secret is Oklahoma fans feeling like, did Lincoln Riley throw the Bedlam game? Right? I mean, is that not something that Oklahoma fans have wondered, or was he not all in mentally for the game? I mean, on some level, was he detached? Was it outright throwing the game? Was it just he wasn't mentally dialed in? I don't know, right? But you and I have speculated that. Listeners of this show have speculated that. Folks over at the Ref have speculated that. It's been any Oklahoma fan circle or media circle. It's been discussed, and you kind of carefully discuss the idea of a coach throwing a game, right? Or whatever direction you want to take on that. It's a hard thing to wrap your mind around because it almost sounds impossible that a competitor would do that. And yet here you have a former player that, whether it's in reaction to you and I discussing it or just the overall Oklahoma fan base, those thoughts existing out there, I don't know if, I took his comments as he, as one of the players, had a similar feeling about the way the game was called in the aftermath of all of it. Did you?
Yeah, that's the way I took it. And I felt like not just him, but I think you, in response to a lot of what went down, you saw a lot of players talk about how things were wasted, or they didn't get the best out of themselves from the coaching staff. They didn't get the best from the coaching staff in those final few weeks of the season. The thing that I wanted to say earlier that now I remember is Jaden Davis kind of breaking down, like, if Oklahoma wins that game, they go to the Big 12 title game. And if they win that, they potentially go to the playoff, and USC has to move on from Lincoln Riley. He doesn't take that job. Kind of circling back to supporting what his thought was, that, okay, maybe he wasn't fully, locked in and fully committed to winning that football game. And I know we're not sitting here trying to, bring up old news and talk about, how we miss Lincoln Riley or anything like that. I think it's very much clear Oklahoma got it right with Brent Venables, and it's going to continue to prove right, especially now that Malachi Nelson is entering the transfer portal out of USC. I mean, how much more could you ask or look to for evidence that Oklahoma is on a much better trajectory right now than USC is, especially at quarterback with, Jackson Arnold taking over in 24. You're bringing in Michael Hawkins, Brendan Zerbrug, and then you got Kevin Sperry coming in the 2025 class. Like, man, things are looking up for the Sooners, despite having the offensive wonderkind in Lincoln Riley no longer with us. But that's going to do it for today's episode of Locked On Sooners. Thanks so much for tuning in, being a part of the show. Subscribe to the show wherever you get your podcasts. Follow Josh on Twitter at Josh on Ref, myself at John 9 Williams. The show is at Locked On Sooners on Twitter, Facebook, TikTok, Instagram, wherever you get your socials. That's where we're going to be at. But until next time, he's Josh. I'm John. Boomer Sooner.